We're back with another one-off episode in this semi-season 8 of the Leadville 100 Mountain Bike Podcast. We hope this audio finds you well and your training going as planned. We are sending the show out just after the Silver Rush 50, so congrats to all who towed the line and got it done. Not so easy, that 10,000 feet, is it? Right. We've got a couple things we think will help you in the final weeks before the big one, so get in your corrals and get ready for that shotgun blast.
3, 2, 1.
Leadville, the podcast for the 100-mile mountain bike race, presented by Shimano, the show that breaks down, builds up, gets you ready, freaks you out for the highest, hardest one-day mountain bike race in the country. I am Michael Houghton, Hottie to most. There's a lot to training for an event like Leadville, the miles, the intervals, the weeks of wondering if you're getting it right. But what about those last couple weeks? For this year, we're talking about the days between July 26th and August 9th. This is the time most coaches will say you do your taper. The idea of a taper sounds straightforward. Back off all the miles, keep some intensity, and allow your body to reap the benefits of all that training. Yet it's so easy to get it wrong and go to the line with something less than what we are truly capable of. Well, to help us get it right, we have called back Season 5 coach Cody Waite, who is going to spell out how to nail your taper for Leadville. But first, a little Leadville news that some of you may be aware of, but I thought it was worth repeating here. The Leadville City Council and the Lake County Board of Commissioners both recently approved the permits for the Leadville 100 mountain bike race and run. Those bodies do the permits separately from the other lifetime events in town due to the size and complexities of the 100s. To secure the permits, the race series agreed to make a few changes to how things are run, and they may have an effect on you. First, and this is a good thing for racers, more porta potties at the start-finish. One of the chief complaints has been racers getting quote-unquote creative with where they go before the gun goes off. So again, the race series has promised to add even more porta potties near 6th and Harrison. 2, there's going to be an ambassador program. Volunteers will be working the downtown area, talking to racers, crew, spectators, and residents. This is something local government and Lifetime wants as they attempt to balance the needs of both the event and the community. 3, and this is probably the biggest one, and that is the race series has agreed to lower the volume at both the athletes meeting on the field and at 6th and Harrison on race day. The athlete meeting used to be indoors, so this was not a problem in the past, but outdoors on the football field, the residents hear it, and local officials agreed the volume needs to come down. The PA on Federico Field will be on for no more than 90 minutes, and the decibel level no higher than 65. As for the start-finish sound levels, race director Tammy Genlink agreed to look at ways to turn things down there as well. And they may also look into a shotgun blast that's not quite so as loud. Don't know about that one, how you're going to get that one done, but okay. One big thing that never made it out of committee was moving the start. Yes, there was some talk of moving the start line to, I think it was the community fields area, which is at the bottom of 6th Street as you roll out of town. But during an early spring meeting, that idea was couched in favor of keeping the 100s in the center of Leadville. All right, a few things to ponder there. The good news is the show will go on. It is odd how late in the game, though, these permits are issued, but it sounds like the two sides are committed to getting this work done before we get into full-fledged race season in Leadville. Okay, on to our main topic, and that is those final 14 days before race day. Like we said, Coach Cody Waite is back to explain. Cody has been at this bike racing thing for 25 years, and most of that time he's been involved with helping others race. He founded Waite Endurance Coaching in 2004. He is a USAC Level 1 coach, which I think is their highest, and he has twice received a USA Cycling Center of Excellence designation. He has coached more than 100 Leadville-bound racers, so he is more than qualified to help us nail our taper for Leadville.
Hi, I'm Cody Waite with Waite Endurance. We're going to be demonstrating the aerobic strength intervals. 3, 2, 1, start. Crank it really hard for the first 5-10 seconds.
Like we said, we welcome back to the show, Cody Waite. Yes, welcome back, because Cody was our featured coach way back in season 5, and we had Cody on a bunch of times just to talk about how to get ready for Leadville. Cody was training Fatty, so Fatty was following along in the Cody program. And so Cody, first of all, thanks for coming back on the show. A couple years, now 3 years later, I guess?
I think it has been that long, yeah. In fact, when you were updating or having me update my bio, I was sadly shocked to see the numbers increasing of the number of years I've been coaching and racing. And it's like, gosh, man, I'm getting old. The years are adding up. Aren't we all, though, I suppose?
Well, you've made a great go of it with the coaching and racing. Are you still racing? Where does that fit in your life? Where does Leadville fit in your life right now?
Yeah, at the moment, no longer racing myself, still riding, 3 or 4 days a week, nothing excessively long like back in my Leadville days, but really now just focusing on staying healthy and fit. And then the majority of time being spent coaching our WE Development junior riders, racing cross-country mountain bikes and kind of growing them into the next, generation of the sport, so to speak.
Cody's got the goods, folks. He has 3 Leadville finishes, 2 in the low 7s and 1 sub-7 at the age of 42. So the guy knows how to go fast and know how to get ready for this event and how to get others ready for the event, which is why we have Cody on. We're going to talk about tapering, folks. And Cody, I think with tapering, this is one of the areas that maybe the most difficult to understand when it comes to training. I know I always kind of struggle with it, like when to kind of cut back and what you do when you do cut back. So why don't you explain kind of tapering in general quick, like why do we taper in the first place?
Yeah, tapering is one of those, hard to grasp concepts for a lot of athletes. I break it down into 2 things that you're really looking to accomplish with a taper. One is to reduce your fatigue levels. The second thing is, and it's sort of an inverse of that, is increase your freshness or readiness levels to perform when your event comes. So those two, it's a 2-prong effect. An event like any endurance event, but particularly Leadville, there's so much training involved, weeks, if not months of preparation goes into that. We're training, on a regular basis, day after day, week after week, building lots of fatigue. That's part of the training process, is we're trying basically to fatigue ourselves and then have our bodies adapt to that. And as we get closer to our primary event, what's happening is you really want to reach the highest levels of that fatigue with, the maximum volumes or training loads in your training, in the weeks prior to your main event till August. But you don't want to show up to race day having just built up all of that fitness, because you have all that fatigue along with that fitness. So it's really important to include that taper where you can back off on the training. And it's hard to do. It's really hard because we get in this cycle or rhythm of like training day to day. We love it, right? We're out there. We can't wait to get on our bikes, hopefully at this point, and, getting fitter and fitter. But we have to back that off so that kind of exchange a little bit of that fitness that we've worked so hard to earn in favor of more freshness and readiness. So when we show up to the start line, we're ready to put out a peak performance, ideally.
And is there anything special about tapering for Leadville?
For one thing, it's such a long duration event. You have to do a lot of training, like we already established. So as a general rule of thumb, the more training you do, the more weeks and months of training that you do building up your fitness, the longer a taper may need to be. Okay, so that's maybe one thing specific to Leadville. The other thing that I think makes Leadville so unique in many ways, but also along in the taper, is the high elevation that's involved. And a lot of people, not everyone, but a lot of people incorporate some sort of altitude preparation, right? So a lot of them either go to the nearest higher elevation area in the state that they live in, or many even now come to Colorado and come to Leadville in the days and oftentimes weeks before the event. Well, what's happening there is when we do this altitude preparation, we're incorporating an extra level of stress into the mixture, into the recipe, right? Training is our stress. And then if you add elevation, higher elevation, that's more stress that our bodies have to deal with. So one of the goals with the taper is to reduce fatigue. We'll associate stress with fatigue and increase freshness. So if we think we're going to taper, but we're actually going to go and expose ourselves to higher elevations, you really have to make sure that you back off and taper almost a little bit more, so you can kind of negate some of that stress that comes with the elevation adaptations, while still being able to recover enough to get the benefit of that taper. Hopefully that kind of makes sense.
Sure. And is tapering different than a rest week?
Yes, for sure. So generally speaking, a recovery week or rest week involves backing off the volume quite a bit, and usually along with that, backing off any high intensity that a rider may have done. With a taper week, you are definitely going to gradually back off the volume, hence the word taper. You're going to sort of like gradually stair step the volume or the training load down progressively over days or weeks, but you are going to maintain some intensity in there as well. So a typical recovery or rest week, you'll kind of drop both volume and intensity. With a taper, you'll gradually drop volume, but you'll still maintain or at least include some high intensity in the week, to maintain some sharpness. And that's part of what that like freshness and readiness side of the equation is making sure you don't just back off. Because if you did a full kind of recovery rest week the week before Leadville, you'd probably show up with some reduced fatigue, but possibly kind of flat or heavy legged, and the gun goes off and away you go. And it's like, oh man, I should have warmed up for this race, which, we do very little warm up generally for Leadville, but if you hadn't done anything all week, you'd need a warm up. So we don't want that.
All right, let's talk about the mechanics then of a taper, and we'll put it into context with Leadville folks. Leadville, again, if you need reminding, it's August 9th. That's the second Saturday in August, as it usually is.
Right.
So if we look at the second Saturday in August 9th in this case, Cody, help us back time to that day with the taper in there.
Yeah, so this is all very dependent on each individual rider, what their training program is like. But I think a 2-week taper is fairly standard. There are some special things to consider. Age of an athlete is one, but an older athlete might need a little bit longer. But in general, 2 weeks. So working kind of backwards from race day, most people's last kind of big long ride is going to happen on that Saturday 2 weeks prior, which I believe is July 26th this year. So that's often most people's last kind of like whatever their big long ride is that maybe they've built up to. Might be 5 hours, might be 6 hours, might be 7 hours, kind of depends on the athlete in that regards. And sometimes with the athletes I coach, will often have actually their longest ride 3 weeks prior. And then the next week, which would be 2 weeks prior, is still a very long ride, but possibly just not quite as long as that one. But again, it's all very independent or dependent, I should say, on the rider and the situation.
Okay. And then 2 weeks prior to race day, between then and race day itself, what does our intensity look like between, that last big ride and race day?
Yeah, on the intensity side. So I'll typically include 2 interval sessions each week, the 2 weeks prior to the race, leading up to the race. They're spread out by usually 2 or 3 days in between those. So a typical kind of what I would call race prep weeks or tapering weeks in our program is the first one is the Wednesday, like 2 Wednesdays before the race. And it's still a moderately long training session and overall still a fairly challenging training session. We'll hit a lot of the high intensity energy systems, but they'll be in a little bit smaller doses, but it's still a fairly big ride. Then maybe 2-3 days later, so that's often the next Saturday. So this would be the Saturday, the week before the race, would be another similar session, although a little bit lower volume, same intensity levels, but a little bit less total minutes of that said intensity on that day. And then we go another 2 or 3 days. That usually puts us Tuesday of race week is the third, what I would call race prep workouts that we do. And again, reducing the volume, the total volume a little bit more. That's that taper effect there. Doing the same levels of intensity, but again, a little bit less of that. And then we'd go a couple more days, 2-3 more days. And that actually puts us on Friday, the day before the race, for that fourth training session. And really that one becomes more of like a opener workout, is a kind of a popular term. So the day before a race, a lot of riders prefer to go do some sort of really short, relatively easy kind of interval session just to open up their legs, the lungs, that sort of thing, and feel good and ready to race.
Give us an idea of what kind of intervals you're talking about here in these last 2 weeks. Are they VO2 max style, where you're doing like 3 minutes on, 3 minutes off? Or are we just talking quick sprints and a lot of rest? What do they look like in general?
Yeah, it's actually a little bit of that and others, really. So our training program, the training I have our athletes follow, we hit all of the energy systems. So we're talking about like sprint work. We're talking about anaerobic power or anaerobic capacity, VO2 max, like you mentioned, anaerobic threshold, even aerobic threshold. All of those things over, say, the 12 weeks or so leading up to event day. So, it's a real systematic approach there. And we spend about 2 weeks kind of training each system, working from the shortest, most high intense intervals, working out to the longest, most steady state, and most honestly Leadville applicable energy systems, where you'll spend most of your day on race day in the aerobic threshold and anaerobic threshold kind of efforts in there. So those are spread out. So when we get to our race prep phase, the taper phase, the last 2 weeks, we go back and revisit each one of those kind of energy systems or zones and just do small amounts of them. So it's possible about a month before the race, a rider might be doing like anaerobic threshold. So a popular workout is kind of like 4 times 16 minutes at their like around their FTP power, that threshold level power, right? It's a classic workout. Great. But in our taper session, the first taper session that Wednesday, the week, two Wednesdays before the race, we're going to hit that same power level, that anaerobic threshold power level around that FTP. But instead of 4 16-minute intervals, we're going to just do 4 4-minute intervals of that level. Okay. Then the next time we do that session, a few days later, we're going to do 3 4-minute ones. And then on Tuesday, the week of the race, it might just be 2 of the 4-minute ones. And then even the day before the race, it's just 1 of those. So gradually tapers down the amount that you're doing. And it's not just those. So we, in a full training, in the training session, we would go through that. And then we'd also do a selection of VO2 training zone, hitting those targets like VO2 zones, hitting the anaerobic power zones, and even doing a few sprints too. But same pattern where you're going to do a lot less than you did in training over the last several weeks or months in a training session. And then also as the race prep tapering workouts progress, you're going to do fewer and fewer minutes or seconds of those intervals as well. So that creates that taper, that declining volume, but maintaining intensity that hopefully reduces fatigue and bring back freshness. Those are our 2 goals.
You're still taking the drug. You're just lowering the dosage.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. And that's a great analogy because, if we're doing this for weeks and weeks and months, it is like a drug, right? We like to go out, and whether it's those long rides that wear us out or the high intensity intervals, it feels good. I mean, there literally it is a drug, right? And so getting little hits in the taper period is important, not only physiologically, but mentally. It makes us feel good and ready. So that I like that analogy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What can we monitor, by the way, that can help us determine if we're getting this right or wrong? I'm thinking like TSS or heart rate variability. Do any of these data points help us track our taper and understand if we're doing it properly?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm kind of a data nerd myself. I love using all the metrics and things and like training peaks and all that. Yeah, to set your taper up, TSS is very useful. So TSS, for maybe listeners that aren't as familiar, stands for training stress score. Every workout we do, there's an algorithm that combines or calculates the volume and the intensity of the workout or ride you just did, gives it a score so you can kind of relate it. So over weeks and months of training, we're searching for more and more TSS, more training stress. In a taper, like we said earlier, we're looking to reduce that stress or that load. So using TSS, like predicting what the workouts will sort of generate in terms of TSS, we can more precisely figure out what that actual taper, that reduction, gradual reduction in TSS will be. So someone who's trained a lot and has accumulated some pretty big TSS rides and weekly values, their taper week TSS will be higher than someone who's training more on a lower training load training plan. But using TSS is great for mapping that out. You mentioned heart rate variability, HRV, very popular metric these days. I do think it's an interesting metric. It's still relatively new, and the devices used to record it and track it are getting better, but there's still like some room for error. But it's still something that if you use that in your training, it's at least a reference point that you can compare. Where was your HRV? Not only over the last several days, but maybe the last several weeks and months, and where are you now? You should see things start trending towards increased freshness and readiness, which usually means a higher HRV value. So that can be useful. I think waking heart rate it's a kind of an old school method. Taking your pulse, as you wake up, is a good one as well. You should see resting heart rates lower a little bit. Everyone's a little bit different in that. The other one also I think is really useful is actually your working heart rate. So when you go do these training sessions, these race prep sessions, like we just talked about with the intervals and stuff, start to notice things like how quickly does your heart rate respond to those higher power levels. Because when we train a lot, we get fatigued, and that kind of suppresses our autonomic nervous system's ability to the heart rate response to the work that's being done. So it's like it takes longer to get our heart rate up. It's slower to get up. But as we become more fresh, we've reduced fatigue, we've increased freshness. The same intervals, you'll start to see your heart rate increase much more rapidly. And that's a really positive sign of that, occurring. Now, the one little caveat in there is if you are, say, used to living at sea level or a low elevation, and you're doing your taper and you're going to go to Leadville or some sort of high elevation environment, elevation will, play tricks on heart rates a little bit too. So you kind of have to take all of these pieces of the puzzle in. You can't just put it all on the line of oh, my heart rate isn't responding, therefore I'm not getting fresher. It could maybe not be responding as well because you're now at a much higher elevation than you normally train at or something like that. So you have to take, and also things like temperature, if you're going to a hotter environment or a colder environment, that will play tricks too. So you got to take it all in and do your best, ways to kind of suss it out and make sure you're on track. But all of those data points together can help you make sure you're kind of going in the right direction at least.
And if you see your heart rate decouple, like take a dramatic jump higher or lower during one of these taper training sessions, is that an alarm bell or what's happening there?
Possibly. It's one of those things it's not black and white. But yeah, so some of the more steady aerobic sessions that might be included in the taper weeks, seeing heart rate, meaning if you're riding at the same or very similar power levels, if your heart rate starts decoupling or increasing, not sort of in relationship to the power that you're doing, could be a sign that it could be a sign of a couple different things, honestly. That's kind of, the decoupling stuff is maybe more useful actually leading up to the taper, to see that your aerobic fitness has really adapted and that you can go now for multi-hour rides without your heart rate elevating kind of excessively. But again, even that's like, now that it's July and, it's getting hot out in many places, that's going to make our heart rates go up and all those sorts of things. So it gets pretty nuanced, but I mean, taking all that stuff in is definitely useful. And, talking to a coach or a physical trainer or something is a good resource to bounce ideas off of.
I did read something it's been a long time since I even looked up tapering because I don't have a need to taper currently. And I haven't done it in a while. But I came across something about super compensation rides. Now, maybe I just haven't read enough on tapering, and they've always been a thing. Super compensation rides in general, folks. This would be like the Tuesday of race week at Leadville. You'd go out and actually do like a 3-hour ride, which sounds like a lot to me for a race week ride. Mm-hmm. And then after that, I guess the idea is it kind of depletes your carbohydrate storages, and then what you do is you gradually build those carbohydrate storages back up again. Anyhow, I hope I got that right. I don't know. You tell me. But where do you stand on super compensation rides? Is there a fit for that in a taper?
Yeah, I have heard of that. I would think that's a little more maybe old school, possibly, and maybe better suited for a shorter duration event. My fear of kind of depleting anything the week of Leadville is sort of an alarm bell. We don't want to be depleted at any point going into such a big, long, difficult race, in my opinion. I know the kind of the old school carbohydrate loading methods have kind of been pushed aside a little bit as well. And that involved depleting your glycogen stores, as much as you possibly could. So then the theory is then you could like restuff them maybe to a little bit higher level. I think it's a little safer bet, where you're not really walking a fine line of overdoing something by just stay on top of the carbohydrates that whole week of the race. It's part of the taper is refueling that actually reduces fatigue as well. Because a lot of times those last big training weeks we do going into an event like this, it's really difficult to eat enough carbohydrates or just calories in general, even to replenish everything. So it's like you finish that big final block of training, and my favorite saying is like the hay is in the barn now, and there's really not much else to do from a training perspective, and you really want to reload carbohydrate stores, maybe even thinking about that as your super compensation ride is that final big ride 2 weeks out. Like you're going to go for a huge ride. It's going to, dig into those glycogen stores big time. You want to fuel that ride, so it's a good, successful ride. But regardless, you're going to be a little behind. Then use the 2 weeks going into the race in your taper to really reload everything. I think that's just going to be safer for most people to not risk overdoing anything.
Since so many people have become FTP obsessed, I even think, even since we last had you on a regular basis, I mean, FTP has become king, it feels like. If someone were to monitor or test their FTP, would they notice it rising during the taper? What happens to that metric?
Yeah. So let's say you did an FTP test, 2 or 3 months ago, kind of to set up your zones for your final big build. If you want to see the actual number improvement, you'd want to do it once you've kind of done the taper, so to speak. But that would mean doing it like the week of the race. Probably not a good idea. Let's let the race be the test, so to speak. And that's what really matters. That's where we put all this time and energy and money into, and we want to do our best. Now, you could potentially pull out some data from the race possibly and estimate, but it's not the same as like repeating the exact same test. But if you have ways to test it, different people do different methods of testing, doing it like the weekend before the race might not, if someone's really interested in getting that absolute number, that would be probably the time to do it, because you could still recover, that next week going into the race.
Well, I bring it up because Fatty and I did at least a couple of shows over the last season or two discussing with people and experts about how to pace using FTP. I mean, a lot of folks will they will plug in their FTP. They know what their adjusted FTP is for Leadville. Then they'll set a pacing plan based on that number. Now, if you go into Leadville and don't have an accurate FTP, and you're planning on using that strategy, well, you might mess it up, right? So
absolutely.
That's why I think for some people, knowing their FTP somehow in the 7 or 10 days before the race might have value to them. Well, so being in Leadville and reconning the course is going to end up being part of a lot of folks tapering. Like they're going to show up in Leadville a week or two before race day and want to go out and check out the course. Help us pull this off and not screw up our taper.
Right. Yeah, this is always a big question with the athletes we coach. What should I do? I'm going to be in Leadville 2 weeks prior to get used to elevation. It's real easy to potentially do too much while you're there. I mean, one thing you got to understand, again, going to these high altitudes that are, involved, being in and around Leadville training is we're adding a lot of stress. Now, if you're coming from like moderate elevation, like maybe you live in Reno, Nevada or Denver or, something around 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 feet, the jump up to 9,000, 10,000 feet is still significant, but it's not as significant as someone coming from like sea level or, sub 3,000 feet elevation. So you don't want to overdo it, but you do want to see some of the course. There's a lot of value in that as well. So setting that up is great. And, those interval sessions we talked about previously can be done on the course. I think that's a great option if people are in the Leadville area. But, maybe focusing more on the road sections, using that, like the Turquoise Lake road climb that comes near the end of the race. That thing always seems to take forever. And that's a great one to preview. People don't maybe think about it as much because it's like, oh, it's just a pavement climb. But until you've done it and the turns just kind of keep going and you're exhausted and you're hungry and you're dehydrated and all this stuff, it seems like it's never going to end. So doing some of your intervals, the week prior or 2 weeks prior on that road is a good one, in my opinion, because really knowing kind of the last quarter, let's say, of the course really comes into play. Cause that's when you're like, your brain is like gassed and, but you got to stay like engaged. So doing that and then, is a great option. And then on some of the easier aerobic rides that are also part of your taper, but they're much shorter duration than your normal training previously was, is another good opportunity to scout some of the course too. But I mean, I personally would avoid the really tough parts of the course, like the upper half of Columbine, even Power Line. It's just so fatiguing. Those like steep parts, they really wear down, like tire your muscles out basically. I mean, if you got to see them, go see them, but, limit your time and, don't feel like you have to see every inch of the course. I would put priority on, like I said, Turquoise Lake, climb back is a good one. The Boulevard is another one and good for kind of doing intervals. It's a big gravel road. But also one of those ones where like, if you don't see it, I remember the first year I did Leadville, I had pre-ridden at different times the entire course in the weeks leading up because I was living in Denver. And, but I did everything but the little boulevard part because I hadn't done the race before and I didn't really know how it kind of goes back by those houses. And then you make that left turn up the steep rocky hill. So I just didn't really bother. I was like, it's a couple miles left, whatever. And then in the race, I'm watching the timer tick down, trying to go under 7 hours. I'm like, oh my goodness, like this thing goes on and on forever. And you could see the little ant-like people way up there and you're like, oh my gosh, this is so. Previewing the Boulevard, I think, is useful too.
Well, yeah, it's funny how obsessed we get about Columbine and Powerline inbound. But Cody, you nailed a couple of spots. First of all, I've grumbled about that Turquoise Lake pavement climb since I've been part of this show. That place always kicks me in the you-know-where.
Oh, yeah.
And Boulevard is the surprise at the end. Like, that thing is brutal. Like, it is so hard to get up, especially that lower section. It's just nuts. My stock advice regarding reconning the course, especially week of. Now, if you have 2 weeks, maybe you could get a little more in. It's always gone something like this. Like, go ahead and have a look at right out of town, so you get used to that kind of thing.
Yep.
Right up Keevan's outbound. That's fine. You can do that. And maybe call it a day there and then go back and ride if you want and feel like you need to. Ride up Sugarloaf outbound and then descend power lines. You get an idea about that, especially in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
So you get an idea like how that thing plays in the morning with the morning sunlight. And then from there, the course is pretty, I find to be straightforward. Even Columbine is pretty straightforward. What I want to ask, though, is do you think in your non-interval days, can you effectively go out and ride sections of the course, say maybe like a pipeline or something like that, and keep it chill?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's key. I mean, there's a lot of, we'll call them chill segments of the course, and seeing all of those I think is useful. And then you're out there, you're likely to see other racers, the week of at least. And, that's exciting and motivating, and it's fun to meet people and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, a lot of those flatter sections definitely are a good place to do those like aerobic rides, because they're not going to wear your muscles out quite as much as something steep like Powerline or, the upper half of Columbine in those
Right.
spots.
And it's a good chance to just check scout sites to crew. Like you can do that in the Pipeline Outward Bound area, or you
Sure.
can go out to Twin Lakes Alternate and kind of ride around there, but stay off Columbine unless you absolutely need. In fact, you can drive up most of Columbine. If you really need to see it, you can drive up the darn thing and get up there till you get to the goat trail. And so you can get a good look at it.
Right.
So we probably said this already in so many words, but why don't we, again, tell folks regarding tapering, not so much how to do it, but what happens? How do we get this thing wrong? Like where do the screw ups happen?
Right. I've got a couple ideas for that pop immediately into my head. One is avoid any inclination to do any sort of quote cram training, right? This isn't our college days where we forgot to study for a test and, it's 10 o'clock at night and, we got to get that in. Don't do that. Even if you feel like you've missed some training or you're a little bit behind on your training, any significant amounts of training you do inside of 2 weeks to go, you're not going to be able to recover and absorb that training that it's going to benefit you on race day. The only thing extra training does is wears you out and adds to the fatigue rather than reduces the fatigue. And that's one of our top goals, right, in the taper. So that would be one. Another one that I've seen mistakes happen is kind of last minute sort of dieting, potentially like, oh, I've got a few more pounds to lose, to get my watts per kilo to the right spot so I can have that, sub 9 or whatever. And again, dieting, calorie restrictions, that's stressful on the body. There's a time and place for it, maybe in a training program, but that's weeks, if not months, before the race, not the days and weeks, before the race. It's way out there. So don't do that. You really want to fuel, carbos, all that. You don't necessarily want to stuff yourself and be gluttonous in that, but you want to be on top of everything you're expending. You want to replace that and maybe even a tiny bit more and be sort of super compensated like you alluded to earlier. And then one more thing popped into my head too, is this idea of the last 2 weeks, for tapering, we now have a little bit more time on our hands, especially in that second week. If you're not traveling to the race and you are staying at home or whatever the case may be, you don't want to fill that extra time with extra stress. So it's really not the time to think like, oh, I'm not doing, I'm only doing, 2/3 of the training I've done. Now's a good time I can go, repair that fence in my backyard or, cut down that tree or, re-roof my house or whatever. Like, no, that's too exhausting. Like use the extra time to, maybe spend some time with the family, doing chill things, right? Like doing puzzles or watching movies or, whatever it is you can do, right? Because again, one of the big goals, reduce fatigue. We don't want to add fatigue. And then one last little side note on that too, that a lot of people don't think about is think about trying to actually avoid people. And what I mean by that is the last thing we want to have happen once we've done everything the best we possibly could is have someone sneeze or cough on you and you catch a cold or whatever, right? It's difficult if you're flying to Leadville or to Denver But other than that, like try to avoid any, party invitations, office parties, whatever, try to go into that like seclusion hermit mode of, just being around your loved ones and kind of avoiding everything else. Cause I've seen it before and it's so heartbreaking to do all that work. And, 2 days out from the race, someone wakes up and they're like, Coach, I got a sore throat. What do I do? And it's like, all that, kind of can come unraveled. So do everything you can. And, a lot of people these days I think post-COVID, people are a lot more aware of that concept now. In fact, a lot of our athletes will like just anytime they go on an airplane, put on the mask. I know whether you're, pro or con on that, it's like you're doing it to minimize the chance of sort of catching anything because there's a lot of things out there that you could get and we don't want them, especially 2 weeks before.
Right. And don't crash.
And don't,
Keep
that's
it upright.
another, yeah,
that's an easy one. That's the one I've got.
That's the one we have to be harp on our junior riders because they love jumping their bike and doing all this crazy stuff. They love mountain biking. Right. And, it's, we're a week away from national championships and one inevitably will text us, hey coach, I fell and broke my wrist because I was doing, tail whips at the bike park. And it's like, oh, why were you doing that the week before the race? Like, yeah, be safe out there and, let's not hurt ourselves or catch any kind of illness.
All right. Okay, Cody. Well, man, you filled us up again, with some good advice and some ideas and concepts about tapering. Of course, as Cody said, folks, these lessons should apply to you in a very specific way. Like it's not generic. You want to make sure you tailor this to your specific needs. And Cody can help with that. I don't know if you can help with this at a last second notice, Cody, but if they're getting ready for next year, for sure, right? At Waite Endurance Coaching.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I'll put in a plug too. Check out our Instagram. I just did a post actually on this exact topic about 2-3 weeks ago because we have our redevelopment riders are tapering now currently as we record this for mountain bike national championships. And I did kind of like a little post that kind of explained all the workouts I referenced here. And so some of the listeners might get a kick out of that and gain something useful there.
Okay. The handle's Waite Endurance on Instagram as well?
Yep. At Waite Endurance on Instagram.
Excellent. All right, Cody. Well, thanks again. Good luck for the rest of the season with your athletes.
Thank you.
I hope to see you in Leadville once again someday.
Oh, yeah. Well, my wife and I plan to be there. We have a handful of riders racing, young and old. And yeah, we'll be out there probably just for the day. We'll get up early drive up from Denver and spend the day. We've done it every year since I haven't been racing, and it's a blast. In fact, I almost think it's more tiring driving all around, cheering everyone on, maybe than doing the race. My back doesn't hurt as much as when I did the, post race, but I'm just as tired, if not more so, being the supporter for sure.
Yeah. All right, Cody, thanks again for joining us.
All right. Thanks. I appreciate it.
Thanks again to Coach Cody Waite. WaiteEndurance.com is the website, and check out that Instagram post Cody referenced. If you are self-coach and just need a taper template, then Cody has it spelled out concisely on the gram. Okay, that's a wrap for this one. We'll talk again over this channel. I don't know, that's a good question. I have some other ideas, but we'll see if they play out in time. If not, I will see you in Leadville with Fatty and Lisa as she goes for her 20th finish. Oh, by the way, their daughter, Melissa, is the defending champ. So yeah, should be a great weekend. Until then, good luck in your training, and we'll see you at the start line.